Welcome into the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie, joined as always by Mario Puig. We are in that week between the conference championships and the Super Bowl, of course. We'll talk a little bit about what happened last weekend, but today we're going to be focusing on, because of the fact that the NFL is king and the news cycle never sleeps, we'll get into some of those coaching searches, some of those job hirings, and so on throughout this podcast. We're also going to get into a little bit of Senior Bowl discussion, getting you ready for draft season just around the corner. It really starts to kick off, of course, with Senior Bowl week. So stay tuned for more here on the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast. Welcome back into the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast, of course, presented by our friends over at WinBet. I'm John McKechnie, joined as always by Mario Puig. Mario, a lot of crazy things happened since we last talked. The Cincinnati Bengals are in the Super Bowl. We're going to have the second year in a row in which the stadium where the Super Bowl is being played also features the host team, the Rams, of course, following suit with the Buccaneers a year ago. But there's been a ton going on. The coaching search, obviously, the Brian Flores stuff is just a complete mess. It seems like really crazy stuff going on there. But top of the list here that we have to get to. Your thoughts on the new Washington Commanders team name?
It's great. They timed the announcement well. They timed it. Who knows if there's a coincidence behind this, but some new allegations on Dan Snyder came out this morning as well. We already knew he was pretty cool, and now we know he's even cooler than we thought. You can look that stuff up. I think the Commander's name is super mid, predictably uninspired, and I'm going to probably keep calling them the football team, I guess.
I think I will too. I was starting to get used to the football team. It was starting to grow on me, and the logo doesn't really look all that much different to me.
Yeah, they look like I know that the W is for Washington, but it looks like it could be like the Warriors. Or is that? I don't know if that's Waluigi's W, but it looks like that W.
It also kind of looks like the fast food chain Wiener Schnitzel. If that's a fast food chain, or maybe I'm imagining that, or maybe it's from a movie or something, but it looks very similar to like what a fast food chain would link their brand to.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully the players on that team do well or whatever, but hopefully Dan Snyder, hopefully at the very least somebody brings Dan Snyder back one of those giant pallets of melting vanilla ice cream cartons that he left in Mike Nolan's office when he was like gone on vacation or whatever.
Oh,
sorry. I just think Dan Snyder is just an all-time villain. I mean, obviously he is, but he surprises you all the time these days. And you always think, 10 years ago, whatever you knew about him, you thought like, can't get worse than this. And just keeps getting worse, and he just keeps staying in the owner of that team. It's really cool.
Yeah, he continues to find a way. Can really survive seemingly any sort of PR hit, of course. But anyway, so we're starting to see, of course, after Sean Payton steps away right around the time that we were recording the pod a week ago. So many job openings across the NFL. Now we have Tom Brady retiring, so we don't really know what the Buccaneers are going to do next. And actually, I'd like to start there for a second before we dig deeper onto the coaching stuff. But, you look at the two legendary Hall of Fame quarterbacks that are stepping away between Ben Roethlisberger and now Tom Brady, and you look at the context, the landscape right now, where this is not a class that's particularly loaded at the quarterback position. And I know the Steelers have paid some lip service to both Dwayne Haskins and Mason Rudolph. Buccaneers, it's been a little bit too soon to really know what their plans are. I know that there's been a lot of linkage between them and Jimmy G. Of course, we got to figure that Jimmy G's on the move after the NFC Championship performance and the fact that they traded up, spent so much draft capital on Trey Lance. But when you look at those two, it's interesting in the sense that there could be first round quarterbacks available where they're picking. Usually that's not the case because usually these guys are getting pushed into the top 15, top 10, top 5, however you want to put it. None of these guys really, I mean, I could see like one maybe going in the top 15 or so, but I think that there will be quarterbacks available when they're picking. But what's the path forward for both of these teams when it comes to quarterback?
Well, it's definitely a strange time, like you said, because two players that we just kind of took for a given to always be in that quarterback top 5 are gone, and there's both kind of well, I guess we got the prospects from last year who I certainly still believe in Trevor Lawrence, I guess pending whatever incredibly incompetent nonsense Shad Khan and Trent Baalke are cooking up, and I think Justin Fields. I know there was like a rough rookie year, kind of, but he was still showing as much promise as I think you'd hope. But like you said, nobody in this class is really close to guys like them. I don't think there's any even Mac Jones. Like I had Mac Jones ranked ahead of Zach Wilson, but I think there is neither a Mac Jones nor a Zach Wilson kind of prospect in this draft. So that's the kind of starting point I have in mind. And there are certain guys like Ritter I had some hope for, but he measured in like way too light at 6'3", 207 or something like that at the Senior Bowl. And that's like Brett Smith, Anthony Gordon kind of frame. It's just not going to work. I think Carson Strong is the most convincing like pocket passer, but who knows? I guess he's got like the knee and he's not exactly mobile. So I don't know what to expect of him. Don't know how much risk there is there. Malik Willis is the only real upside one left, I guess, and being Auburn transfer to Liberty. Like he's got some pedigree despite the Liberty background, but some of his production is just so rough and the tape's so rough. And with that said, I have to believe it's him who has the ability to like push for that top 15 kind of range, if any of them, just because for as rough as he is, and I think it's like pretty discouraging. I'm not particularly close to convinced with him. But he's got the tools, and he's very convincing athlete, dual threat passer, runner. So especially after a case like Josh Allen, where the polish was just not there at all in college, and he put us some like really brutal numbers, really brutal tape. He was a case where having extreme tools, truly rare athletic tools and a work ethic to eventually chip away, obviously. And I guess it's possible Willis, if he's the same, freakishly hard worker that Allen is, and if his arm, his athleticism do amount to that kind of compelling ability. But I don't know, feels to me like still kind of taking several leaps of faith to get there. And if the desperation of NFL teams can be a lot more powerful than, any otherwise reasons for caution, I guess.
No, absolutely. So yeah, Willis at least has those tools, but like you said, there's going to be some work needed to be done in order for him to get to those tools and to tap into them at the next level. So if you are Tampa Bay, are you going in the trade market?
You're not going with Kyle Trask. You're
right.
I mean, not if you're trying to win anyway. I guess that if they go with Trask, I'm saying like, oh, that's a tank year, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, one interesting thing, aside from even the possibility of Garoppolo moving, and I don't know, man, I could see him getting stuck there again somehow, just because Shanahan has to be prepared to let him go for a price that he's just point blank not going to like. It's like you have to understand you are not in a position to demand anything. You're the idiot who traded up. You mortgage your own team's future to take this quarterback who apparently you don't want now. That's just a big problem for you. Nobody else has to say like, oh, here's a little help, Kyle, for we see that you didn't really mean to spend so much on these quarterbacks. So let's help you out and give you a nice, comfortable price for one of them to make things easy for you. It's like, no, you got to move one now, or you can just keep them both and deal with the political tension that brings. So, but Garoppolo sucks, and like no team is going to offer a first rounder. I know I've been seeing like all this stuff about these teams should offer first round picks for Jimmy Garoppolo, but no, nobody should do that.
Nope.
Nobody will. So he might be moving, and if he does, I guess that's one guy. I guess I just don't know what to expect there. But Marcus Mariota and Mitchell Trubisky are both free agents, and I would bet they're both starting next year somewhere.
Okay, interesting. And let's bring Pittsburgh into the equation here. So obviously, Mason Rudolph and Dwayne Haskins are two guys, but it's not. I mean, if they go into the season with either of those guys as the starter, then that's almost a tank year in and of
It is,
itself.
yeah,
and that's not really the Steelers' MO.
And if you got this terrible quarterback class, and if next year's is better somehow, I guess it does make sense to just kind of say the hell with it this year. Otherwise, the one thing I'll mention is I agree. It doesn't seem like the Steelers would seriously consider tanking. Mike Tomlin, I don't know if he could tank if he tried. He hasn't had that losing record yet. So I will say I think Rudolph was better the last 2 years than Roethlisberger, and I still think Rudolph is terrible. But it's really hard to appreciate just how bad Roethlisberger was the last 2 years. And I don't remember. I think a Browns game last year, in 2020. I mean, Rudolph started, and you saw the whole offense look a lot better because just for the mere fact that he could throw the ball 15 yards. And it's not that he was good at any point, but just opening up the field that way made the whole offense just look better because they had more field to work with, basically. So if they want to try to make like another wild card run with Mason Rudolph, I bet they can actually do it. Just because they already did it 2 years in a row with Roethlisberger, in my opinion, playing even worse than Rudolph would have. Haskins, I think he's just kind of like weird case. I don't think it's happening.
No, I don't either. So it'll be really interesting to see, what those two franchises, obviously coming off of postseasons, what we'll be able to do in 2022 as far as their quarterbacks are concerned. Let's get to a couple of hirings from around the league. I want to first off get your thoughts on the Giants. Obviously, that they've kind of had a massive overhaul in the front office, in addition to the coaching staff. Brian Daboll kind of considered the best of the coordinators that you could have gotten in this coaching cycle. Your thoughts on him landing in New York and what it could mean for Daniel Jones and the rest of this team?
Yeah, I would have gone somewhere else if I was Dable. Like, certainly, I would have preferred Chicago. Basically, anywhere. Jacksonville would have been ideal if certain other things were different about that team. Basically, I think Dable is at once a really good offensive coordinator and deserves a lot of credit for helping make Josh Allen break out the way that he has. I'm not saying that to take credit away from Allen, but I think it's also, I think you can both give Allen all the credit you want and also acknowledge that Dable did pretty much everything, in my opinion, close to perfectly. I think that the ways that they lacked as an offense, and I'm especially thinking about the running game, I guess, and some of their just kind of like dud games this year that kind of got a lot of criticism for Dable. Like going into this year, Dable was kind of like the head coach name. And then over the course of this year, during especially probably that Jacksonville game that they lost, I remember people were saying like, oh, Dable sucks now. I don't think that's true. I think Dable was always doing a really good job. And I think the Bills might miss him a little bit. But I also think that he's stepping into a buzzsaw here because Daniel Jones is terrible. And they're not in a good position to get a quarterback this draft, in my opinion, just because I don't like the class. So you can say Dable is largely responsible for Buffalo's success, and also say he's going to fail unless he gets, let's not say a Josh Allen caliber prospect, because that's getting a little greedy, I guess. But you got to do a lot better than Daniel Jones. Brian Dable with Josh Allen might be great, but with Daniel Jones, nobody is. So I think this is basically a good setup for Dable to fail as a head coach, and not necessarily because he was ever bad, just because it's like bad situation, stupid team.
So there's no world in which Daniel Jones can that Dable can unlock anything in him, in your opinion?
Not in my opinion. I guess we'll see. I mean, don't get me wrong. Dable will run a better offense than Jason Garrett and Freddie Kitchens did. So I guess that could be something, but that's taking you from maybe bottom 3 offense to something like bottom 10, something like that. So I don't think that there's any prayer with Daniel Jones. I actually would be a little curious in that team if they were the one to sign Mariota, because I have a bit of remaining Mariota trutherism to me. Hell, Trubisky would be better than Daniel Jones too. I mean, Trubisky sucks, but
And he knows there was no confusion. He knows the offense.
Right, and like at the ACC, there was no confusion at the time. Like, I can't tell who's better, Trubisky or Daniel Jones. Like, no one had that. No one, Duke fans never said that at the time either. So Trubisky can be terrible and also clearly better than Daniel Jones, and I definitely think that's the case.
Duke football Twitter, famously loud and boisterous.
They've got like no fans. It's so funny.
No,
it's a basketball school. It makes sense.
It is a basketball school, and that's just fine. Looking elsewhere, some of the other hires that have caught your eye from this week.
Well, Josh McDaniels, he had a weird time in Denver, obviously, and the Tebow pick is no good reflection upon him, but it was also one of those things that's just it was so stupid and wacky at the time, even, and especially with the passage of time, I look at that, and in the absence of similarly stupid moves by McDaniels since then, I'm kind of willing to just say he was basically guilty of believing in Santa still at the time. He just kind of like, hey, let's get the storybook quarterback with the throwing motion that they said was too bad to literally play an NFL offense with. And he thought, like, I saw Rudy. I know Santa Claus is real. I know the Easter Bunny is real. I think this Tebow thing can work, and I'm hoping he's learned, since then that just none of those things are true. His offense, I think, fits really well with Derek Carr. Like, the quarterback problem that he brought upon himself in Denver isn't going to be there with the Raiders. So, that Fresno State offense that Derek Carr put up so many stats up at with Devontae Adams and whoever else. That's kind of similar. Like, the NFL closest thing is probably the McDaniels offense, that just tons of pick routes, very horizontally oriented, very fast paced, despite, in the case of the Patriots, not having any actual speed. It's like they kind of move at a quick tempo. They're kind of like quick off the line kind of thing, quick laterally kind of thing. So I think Carr is a good fit for what McDaniels does. I think Carr might keep this good streak going, this like 4 or 5 good years or whatever he's had now. And I think a lot of the guys that they have are perfect for it too. Like Waller, Renfro definitely work well. Like, it's a yards after the catch kind of offense, It's like those two are great for that. Zay Jones, I think his breakout could continue. I don't know if they're going to be able to resign him. I think he's a free agent. So there's a lot to actually like in that offense, in my opinion. And it would be also a good sign for Bryan Edwards, in my opinion, because I think Bryan Edwards is good. And the problem is that offense they had was making him run farther downfield than he has the speed to actually threaten. And McDaniels' offense won't call that. Like, McDaniels' offense, I think, is going to give him that more like 9-yard depth of target that suits him, rather than the 14 or 15 or whatever it was this year.
Do you think that the Raiders go, obviously they've had an overhaul in the front office as well. What do you think that they do as far as their first round pick, checking in at 22 overall?
Well, Casey Hayward is something like 32 or 33 now. He played well last year, but they're going to need a new corner. I don't know what this class is beyond Stingley and the Clemson guy. I don't know if neither of them is likely to fall to 22, right? Stingley's not falling out of the top 5.
No, Stingley, like at worst, will be like late top 10, maybe early teens. Yeah. And then Andrew Booth, I think, is the Clemson guy you're talking about. And he's the next one up. And then I think that there's a bit of like that top end scarcity at corner this year, to where maybe he should go 22nd, but he ends up going like 18th.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's that spot, and I guess they lost something on the interior offensive line this year. They got Miller at left tackle and Leatherwood on the right side, so maybe not tackle.
That Boston College guy, I think, is really lighting it up at the Senior Bowl. Who knows? Maybe he goes
that's
a little
an
bit higher
tackle?
Than that. Even. Interior offensive lineman, I believe.
Interior offensive. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it's I think going to be interior offensive line and I guess corner and maybe linebacker, defensive line. Yeah, I think I would have thought that the Raiders were maybe a little short on speed on offense, with especially the previous offense they were running. But I think with McDaniels, it's like they're ready to pretty much lock it in and go right away on offense. It's like the defense that I wonder about. And I guess they have enough needs there. They can kind of go best player available. And the odds are that player will be a place they need him anyway.
Right, exactly. All right, so good call there. And then your thoughts on Eberflus to the Bears?
I don't know. He's one of those guys who he's a pretty uninspired hire, I would say. He's one of those guys who's, I think, a candidate just because he's been hanging around on some vaguely successful teams, some vaguely respected coaching trees over the past 15 years or whatever, and not so much because anyone looks at what he does and thinks like, oh my God, how did he think of that? The closest anyone would get to feeling that way about him would I guess pertain to like Darius Leonard's stats, which are, impressive. That's cool. Maybe Eberflus had something to do with that, but and you would say, I think, that the Colts defense was generally pretty good under his watch, and he also probably did some decent work in Dallas. But I think the reason this guy's getting hired is basically because it's like, oh, well, he's worked under Frank Reich, and we respect Frank Reich, and Frank says he's a solid guy, and he was trained under Rod Marinelli or somebody like that in Dallas, so he's got a good, he's been mentored well, and people say he's not a freaking jerk idiot, and like that's basically all, and like that's what got him the job, and maybe that profile is gonna work. I mean, I don't see any like obvious red flags with him, but beyond running like a Tony Dungy inspired defense to moderate success, I don't know what he's done.
Yeah, it did feel kind of like a B minus type of hire, and when you have the potential for your franchise to completely change. The Bears obviously have had quarterback problems the entire duration of their franchise history, which is obviously one of the longest. You would think that maybe going the offensive route would have been ideal, or like you mentioned, Brian Dable might have been the move, but there it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's so Brandon Staley was a defense guy, right? But he's a former quarterback, so he kind of understands the whole thing. And I think there's definitely a way to be a defensive person who still has the proper offensive acumen. And I feel like Eberflus hasn't proven himself a buffoon. So there's a chance that he's more like another McDermott or another, I don't know, Tom, not Tomlin, like a direct comparison, like something like that, but just one of those guys who is primarily defensive, but still just runs a good show. And unfortunately, you can't really know that stuff until you see them in action. And who knows which way it'll cut? But it feels just has a little luck and solves that question for Eberflus. Then I guess that's the way it would be a particularly good hire. But who knows?
Yeah, it does come down to him pretty much. So that those two will be tied together, fair or not. Your thoughts on the Saints? I feel like that they've of like all the open jobs, like that one doesn't seem like it's picking up a lot of like national traction. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, it seems like a sucker's job to me. Like it's like Sean Payton. He's a good coach, He got his success, and he's had success in a lot of roles in a lot of places over a very long time. He didn't do that by being a moron, Like he looks at this team now and he's like, "Oof, that cap situation, this quarterback depth chart I've got, this I might lose Teron Armstead, my offensive line that's so good might not be so good all of a sudden, and Cam Jordan's turning 34 or something. What the hell are we gonna do? I think I'll retire." Like I don't think I'm gonna be doing much about this, and I don't think anybody's doing much about that except losing. And maybe the person hired to lose will be given enough leash to actually try to fix this thing. But in the meantime,
so do you think that there's a potential for it to be like a David Culley 1-year meat shield?
Well, I was going to say, apparently, like who knows what's going to go on with this Brian Flores thing, but particularly in light of the NFL's new thing about like giving a compensatory draft pick to teams that hire minority coaches, the Texans hiring a minority coach and then firing him within 1 year after signing 53 Rex Burkheads to 1-year deals at the veteran minimum. It's like, that's pretty cynical looking, especially when you go to hire some just, I shouldn't say too much about McCown, but they're giving away a bit of the game with that one. They're not making you guess what they're thinking there. And it's nothing good, nothing wholesome. So whatever. Good luck, Jack Easterby, with that one. But in the meantime, with this Flores thing coming up, I don't know if anyone's going to feel so safe pulling what the Texans just did. But yeah, if the Saints were to exercise that sort of cynicism, it's like, they could go and try to hire a Cully and then just fire him next year when they got a nice draft pick and they go after the Dable of that year then or something like that.
Yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, the Saints are in kind of a strange little spot. We got a glimpse of what life after Breeze looked like in 2021.
They should just run a wishbone. I mean, Taysom Hill can't throw, but at least he can run. Just don't throw.
Simple enough, in my opinion.
Grow up, run the wishbone.
There it is. Before we get on to some Senior Bowl discussion, we got a word from our sponsors over at Blue Wire. We also got a message from our friends over at WinBet. If there's one thing we appreciate here at Rotowire, it's making good decisions, and even more so, making the right decision. Listen up, folks. I have an incredible offer for you with Rotowire's newest partner, WinBet, the premier digital and casino and sportsbook app. WinBet is now the exclusive sponsor for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. WinBet brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WinBet's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down in blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at Baccarat. WinBet is currently available in 7 states. That's Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WinBet, the possibilities are limitless. WinBet is currently offering all Rotowire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WinBet now. That's WYNNBET. WinBet, the exclusive partner for Rotowire Fantasy Podcast. All right, Mario, let's shift gears. Again, we don't really have a game this weekend other than the Pro Bowl, but the Senior Bowl, of course, is always an interesting one. And the week leading up to the Senior Bowl is usually of particular interest, and the game itself has varying degrees of utility. But the practices are obviously where kind of the differences are made, where guys can start to push their way up boards or maybe slide down, whether it's the measurements, maybe whether it's the performance in practice. Like Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State has apparently made himself a good amount of money this week, the edge rusher. Pretty impressive guy.
What, the Georgia transfer?
He is the Georgia transfer. Did Kirby Smart mishandle the Jermaine Johnson situation? Probably. But
sorry, I wasn't trying to pick at a scab there.
No,
I knew nothing about the guy.
They won a national championship, so I'm set for 41 years or however long it is until
there's a different dimension somewhere where you're you closed your laptop after I said that. The podcast ended right there because they lost to Alabama 2 times. Anyway, yeah, it's an interesting class, and I think at receiver especially, it's rather strong there. I can't speak too much at all about the offensive line or the defenders. I can't really get into those guys until the combine. I just don't really know how to evaluate them until I have the size, speed details. But these receivers, I think there's at least I'd say almost like 8 to 10 who I think could push for mid rounds or higher. And in the case of Jahan Dotson, I wouldn't be shocked if he's like a first rounder.
Yeah, Dotson, I think that he was one of those guys that I believe opted out this week of the practices.
Oh, okay.
So we haven't heard too much, but like you said,
yeah, I kept trying to look at their official roster list, and it seemed to not match up with what I was finding. Anyway, sorry, yeah, I didn't. He's awesome, even if he doesn't go to the Senior Bowl or doesn't do the practices. In my opinion, I think if anything, he's probably right to not practice. This game is beneath him.
Yeah, I kind of think so too, actually. So he didn't really need to be there. Guy I was hyping up on this pod a week ago, James Cook, also opted out, unfortunately, but I felt like he could have really made some headway this week. However, most of the Georgia guys are not participating for either injury or other reasons. So no Cook. Hopefully he'll be at the combine and be
that's
able
all
to
you
make
really
me
need.
not look
Senior
stupid.
Bowl. Senior Bowl's fine, whatever, and some guys help themselves, but there's also a bunch of like noise every year, because every year there's a Senior Bowl and they need to have a story even if there isn't one. So some years you get fed a bunch of hype about Chad Williams or James Washington or something, and it's not always somebody who's actually good. So but the combine is the big thing. If you don't get a combine invite, that's usually pretty big red flag for a prospect.
Yeah, exactly. So that is about a month or so away as it stands right now. So we'll see what goes on there. But I want to circle back more. So we talked about Jalen Tolbert. I took him in that dynasty rookie mock a week ago. So he checked in. I was worried that that the frame that was listed at South Alabama was one that was a little bit too string bean for NFL projection, but he checked in this week at like 6'1", 195. So that's a little bit more conventional.
Was it like 6'1" and 5/8 or something like that? I'm just surprised because he looks more like the 6'3" that he was listed at, being
he's so 6'1" and 2/8.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, that really is 6'1". Anyway, like you said, that's fine build wise. The one thing I'll say with him, I do hope he runs pretty well in the 40, because he won so much as like a downfield receiver and was so great in that role. But if he doesn't have real NFL speed, like standout NFL speed, then it might be hard to win the same way. So that's not to say he's like done at that point, but he might have to like remodel his game if he's any worse than like a 4.46 kind of guy or something.
Okay, so that 4.46 is kind of what you'll be monitoring with.
That would get him in like the round 2 kind of conversation for me if he could do that.
Okay, all right, strong. Looking elsewhere at some of these other kind of big name receivers here. Khalil Shakir out of Boise State, hyper productive player for several years there for the Broncos.
His birthday today.
Hey, look at that. And happy birthday to Khalil Shakir, man. Absolutely. Smurf turf legend. 6 foot, 193. Haven't heard a ton about his performance this week, one way or the other, but do you have any expectations on him, where he might end up?
So I like Shakir. His workout numbers can hold quite a bit of sway over where he specifically projects, though, because he is skinny. Like, we definitely know he's skinny. He's always going to be skinny. We don't expect him to be fast exactly, but as long as he's got like a smooth athletic profile, like as long as he's a guy who starts and stops well and changes direction well, that's all his skill set really needs anyway. Like, he projects more as like an underneath intermediate kind of guy in the NFL. And his production at Boise State, I can just say, is awesome. Like, his production is spectacular there. And it's possible that he kind of had like an easy job, like kind of being an underneath, heavily featured underneath yards after the catch kind of guy. Like maybe he doesn't make as many plays if he has to run the John Hightower routes or something like that. I don't really know, but I think that Shakir's production is really encouraging because it's both very high volume and very high efficiency, withstands the age adjustment penalties really well. He's got just totally clean numbers, and they were accumulated when Boise had a bunch of upperclassmen receivers playing on the same team as him. Like C.T. Thomas is at least like a year older. Hightower was there for a couple of years, and Hightower was playing at like 23, 24 years old, and Shakir was still out producing him. So I think there's nothing that I look at in Shakir's profile that makes me think any lower than the 3rd round, unless he tests poorly as an athlete. But otherwise, you might be able to plug him in as like the way the Rams used Robert Woods.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's a promising comp trajectory. Again, we'll need those workout measurements. However, what we know about Shakir right now is pretty promising stuff. Looking at Romeo Doves, he's someone that I've been a big fan of for the last couple of years. Kept a close eye on him in that Nevada offense. Impressive numbers throughout, and that he wasn't a one-man show necessarily, in the sense that he was the only guy that could do anything in that receiving core. Like, they had impressive other guys. I mean, Cole Turner, the tight end, obviously a stud. You look at some of those other guys, the senior who keeps getting hurt for Nevada. His name's escaping me. And Torrey Horton, Elijah Cooks, yes, and then Torrey Horton, another talented guy. So even with all those guys in the mix, Doves was still kind of like stood out above the rest. Him and Turner kind of like the 1A, 1B in what was one of the more explosive offenses in the Mountain West. And he checks in like 6'2", 204 with absolute mitts, like over 10-inch hands as well.
That's interesting. Yeah, Doves is pretty convincing too. Like his numbers don't stand out quite as quickly, especially the share percentage sense as like we were just talking about Shakir. They're in the same conference, right? So it's pretty similar levels of competition for the two of them. Doves way above baseline at Nevada, and in 2020 he actually had a lot higher of a target share than he did this year. I don't know if like somebody got hurt that year, but I'm pretty sure he had something almost like 33+% share of their offense in 2020. And he was a 4-year, not starter exactly, but he played a lot even as a true freshman and was productive as a true freshman. So Doves is, again, like my process looks at him and it sees no red flags at all. Like if he gets a red flag, it's because of his production details. But in the meantime, I don't think he's another case like DeMonte Coxey or whatever like that. Like that's an example of a player who is old by like 2 or 3 years for his experience level. And Doves was not. Doves was always playing early and at an age disadvantage, it seems. So his production is just totally clean. And to the point where it's like, even if he doesn't test well, I think he'll still project as like a really good, I don't know, wide receiver 3 kind of guy. Like even if he doesn't project as like a standout starter, it's like, it's hard for me to imagine Doves not doing anything in the NFL.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm relatively sold on him at least being a contributor at the next level. And yeah, like you said, his target share this year was 20.2%. Cole Turner drawing 17% of the targets, and then they just kind of spread it out. Torrey Horton, Melquan Stovall, Justin Lockhart, and Elijah Cooks before he got hurt.
And Stovall was like a 6-year player too, so that's tough when you're a 4th-year player to preserve your target share when a 6-year transfer shows up. And wasn't Stovall also like a 3 or a 4-star or something? So that's plenty good excuse, especially if Cole Turner is as good as he otherwise appears to be.
Right, exactly. So all things looking pretty good for him. A couple of other receivers with kind of like standout measurements to me. I don't really know much about Christian Watson out of North Dakota State, but 6'4", 211, and then obviously a couple of the Ole Miss guys. Braylon Sanders, 5'11", 188, so he projects more like a slot guy. And Dontario Drummond, 6 foot 217, a little bit of like a mini AJ Brown. In terms of
those guys are both very old for their levels, so we'll see. With a player like that who has good enough production but doesn't, for me, withstand the age adjustment penalty, at that point I need them to test well athletically. So if Drummond runs like a 4.38 or something, I'm like, oh, that'll get me back in a hurry. But if he's only like an average athlete, then he's probably a practice squatter to me. Okay. The North Dakota State guy is an interesting one though, because he's a redshirt senior, so there's a bit of like an age adjustment penalty that you would give him looking at his numbers. But I feel like that's the same. Well, it's not the same thing, but Kenny Galladay was like a 5th-year guy when he went from North Dakota State to Northern Illinois, I guess. So it's different. But in any case, it's like he was the same kind of player, 6'4", 210 or whatever. And it seems like he's going to test pretty well. Like at least everybody talking about him at the Senior Bowl is talking about how he's making all these athletic plays and stuff. So if he's one of the biggest receivers and a standout athlete, that's, again, the kind of thing that can get me to look past any age adjustment penalty, because at that point it's like, because he's a good athlete, we have reason to think he produced as a 5th-year player, not because he was older than the competition, but because he was faster than the competition. So that's the kind of stuff that comes to mind for me with him. He could push for, I don't know, I guess like the 2nd round, pending what kind of numbers he puts up. But he does need to put up decent athletic testing for me. There's a few other wide receivers that I like here, and depending on how their workout numbers go, but like the Coastal Carolina Javon Haley, whatever. He's got really good numbers, really clean production. So if he tests well, that'll be interesting. Trey Turner at Virginia Tech was kind of weird. Like he started really fast there.
Yeah, he was great as a freshman.
Yeah, never really built on his share of the offense, but if he tests well, that'll make me pretty curious again. And a lot of hype for Calvin Austin, the Memphis guy. I don't know what to make of him. Like, his production is actually not very clean. It was clean this year, but he just turned 23, or he's about to turn 23. So the age adjustment kind of like negates the impressiveness for me there. I need him to test really well at 5'7", 173. And I don't know. I'm probably going to be a little lower on him than most people. Otherwise, that Beau Melton from Rutgers, he's a bit overaged too, but when I look through his production in each year, it withstands the age adjustment penalty pretty well. And if he tests okay, like, man, his production is really, really good at Rutgers, because they had, of course, trash quarterbacks. So you look at his numbers at a glance, and it's like, oh, I don't see what's so impressive about this. But then when you look at the rest of the Rutgers passing game, it's like, oh my God, how did he average 7 yards a target in this offense? They, completed 46% of their passes for 5 yards an attempt.
Yeah, I think one of the standout parts of your process, and one that's been imbued onto me for how I look at these guys, is looking at the team context. Because like you said, if you look at just a receiver from a terrible offense, the numbers are not going to compare to some of the other top guys. But Melton, I believe he was a 4-star, one of the better as far as recruiting pedigree is concerned, that Rutgers was going to poll over these last handful of years. And, there's a reason, of course, that he was always like 4K on DraftKings, and it's because the rest of that offense. But he was always getting targets, drawing them at a reliable rate, catching them at a good enough rate. It's all relative to the baseline, and he was clearly above it.
Yeah, and like I said, the age would conventionally be like a little bit of a concern, but the thing is, when you look at the year by year production that he had, you can see him dominate the way that he's supposed to with the age advantage. So it's like it's one thing to be a bad player who all of a sudden gets better his fifth year, Kenny Pickett, but if you have that age advantage and if you have that age advantage and you dominate like an extra level like you're supposed to, it's like Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle, I guess, are the most perfect example of that, because they're both turning 22 in season. But it's okay because you're averaging 14 yards a target. It's like it's fine. It's not that bad. So yeah, Melton is the same thing, but instead of having an offense that averages 76% completed in 10 yards per attempt, it's 46 and 5.
Yeah, you look at the rest of his Rutgers teammates. No one else was above 335 yards this year. No one caught more than 2 touchdowns, other than Beau Melton, who, of course, rang up 618 yards and 3 touchdowns, drawing about 9 targets per game, about 24% of those Rutgers targets. Let's move on over to running back before we get out of here. Again, it's not a standout class that we're treated to once again this year. I guess I want to start things off with someone who seems to be making a little bit of noise, and that's Damian Pierce out of Florida. Florida just had a kind of funky run game over these last couple of years under Dan Mullen, so I don't think you can penalize him too much for that.
I hate offenses that do the 7 carries for 6 different running backs every game. So stupid. Yeah, Damian Pierce, his numbers are really clean, and his pass catching really stands out. Like those pass catching numbers, I don't know. Like, if he tests pretty good, I could see him pushing for the 3rd, maybe even the 2nd round, because it's the lack of like market share is clearly just a part of the team's philosophy. It's not like a reflection of his abilities, and the pass catching ability, especially in a running back class like this one, it's fine. There's no stars. There's nothing that impressive about it. Rachaad White obviously went to another level yet this year as a pass catcher, so he's pretty interesting too. But Pierce has the more classic NFL kind of frame, like White's built a little tall, a little light. Pierce is more stocky, but still very quick, explosive, polished pass catcher. So he's pretty interesting. I got to look a little bit more at guys like Hassan Haskins and Abram Smith. I don't really know what to think of them. I'm not, especially in the case of Smith, I'm pretty skeptical. And Haskins, I don't know. He's interesting, but he's
Haskins is a thumper, and like
he's interesting to me in like he's like Trey Rogas kind of thing, which like maybe, I don't know.
Yep. I love a good Trey Ragas callback. But when it comes to Smith, he had the dreaded guy with the small hands that everyone points out at the Senior Bowl.
Him and Tyquan Thornton too. Like Tyquan Thornton was kind of interesting at Baylor, but he has like 7.5-inch hands, which I've like never seen before.
I looked at Abram Smith a little bit closer. He's a converted linebacker,
right?
And he fumbled in his first start this year and lost the fumble, but only fumbled once after that the rest of the season. So ball security, despite all of that, was not really an issue for him. And you can almost forgive some of it for just the position transition.
Yeah, I don't know if hand size for running backs matters at all, because it's like, even as far as ball security goes, you're doing a high and tight thing, you know. With quarterbacks like Kenny Pickett, you fumble a lot when you have small hands because you're not high and tight. You are just gripping the ball. So,
right.
I don't know if it might matter for Smith. I have no idea, but he needs to test well. If he does, then I'm kind of interested a little bit. But yeah, I kind of hate this running back class after the first like 4 guys. Tyler Algier, like I was talking about before, he's interesting to me. If he tests well, especially, I could see him. He could like push for the top running back spot for me. Like not realistically, it's Breece Hall. But actually, more than the running backs, the tight ends are actually really good at the Senior Bowl, right? Like it's not just Trey McBride, who seems pretty convincing. Charlie Kohler, he's like a big tight end who seems really convincing, and Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina, kind of more the McBride mold, I guess. Cole Turner, obviously, we were talking about, he's good. So yeah, I'm pretty curious to see how the tight ends do in addition to the receivers.
Yeah, I like there's a lot of productive guys from this class. You know, the testing will kind of round out the rest of their profile, but you know, at least in terms of production, you know, this is a strong class. You know, pretty throughout. You know, it's better on the whole than last year's. Obviously, we don't have a Kyle Pitts or even a Pat Freiermuth in all likelihood, but there's a bunch of guys that you could see being contributors.
Yeah, I could see there being a Freiermuth or two, not like the same kind of player exactly, but I don't know, man. If Likely tests good, if McBride tests good, their numbers are pretty convincing. Kohler too, like if he's like 6'6", 255 plus, if he tests decently, he could push really high, because there's not many tight ends who are that big and who pass catch the way he did at Iowa State. Like there's a big difference to me between like a Charlie Kohler and like a Harrison Bryant or whatever. Because like when you're pass catching at that level and you're built like an inline tight end, that's pretty interesting. When you do it at 240 pounds and you run a 4.75, I don't really care. But if you run a 4.75 at 260, that's different.
For sure. Yeah. And Kohler was good his entire time at Iowa State, if I remember right. So,
yeah,
you know, I think he could have come out last year and probably still gotten drafted. Yeah. I think not a Senior Bowl guy, but Chisholm Okonkwo from Maryland, you know, he's done well. I think at the Shrine Bowl that this week, he produced reasonably well for the Terps this past season. So he's more of like he might get drafted type of guy, but still someone to like keep on your radar here moving forward as we you know, kind of hit full throttle on the pre-draft process. But otherwise, I think that's it. I think we have hit everything for today. Obviously, next week we are going to have a bonanza of a show. We got Super Bowl coming up, Bengals, Rams, full breakdown, fantasy. So we'll help you with your DFS builds, help you with some betting. I'm going to drive up to Tennessee on Monday. I'm off on Monday, and check out the sports betting offerings in the great state of Tennessee. Get on over, maybe eat some food in Chattanooga. It'll be a nice little day off. So looking forward to that. But otherwise, that's going to wrap it up for us here at the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, brought to you by our friends over at WynnBET. Thanks for listening.
Try Rotowire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/try.